asking participants to note that there's recording taking place. So if you can give us permission to do that, that's fantastic. And I'd like to begin with a welcome. Welcome to this exciting session as part of the Science Summit at the UN General Assembly number 77. So absolutely thrilled to be have the opportunity of interacting with you today about this incredibly important topic of strategic alliances. So let me begin by introducing myself very briefly. I'm going to act as the chair for this session. My name is Sionade Robinson. I am, as you can see from my logo, here at City University of London. We are an ambitious university serving a very diverse student body here in right on the border of the financial district, the City of London, in the heart of a thriving global city, full of many opportunities and potential partnerships. I'm going to just make reference to the fact that colleagues will know yesterday was a very important day in London in which we said goodbye to our monarch, the Queen, and I would like just briefly to quote from her in an address she gave to the United Nations General Assembly in 2010, which I think speaks to our theme today. So here is the quotation from Queen Elizabeth from back in 2010. She said, "I know of no single formula for success, but over the years I have observed that some attributes of leadership are universal. And they're often about finding ways of encouraging people to combine their efforts, their talents, their insight, their enthusiasm, and their inspiration to work together." So I'd like to thank one of our speakers today, Tim Bodley-Scott, for in fact suggesting that wonderful quotation from the late Queen Elizabeth. And let me now move to make an introduction to Tim before I will also introduce his colleague Ursel. But first, let me explain. Tim Bodley-Scott is a Strategic Alliance Director at the very prestigious University College London. And he works within the Computer Science Department, where he develops transformational strategic alliances with key industry and academic partners. Moving on to his co-presenter today, Ursel Oymak. Ursel is a Strategic Alliances Advisor and Innovator in Residence for UCL. He was formerly Head of Strategic Alliances Directors and Corporate Relationships for UCL and an Advisory Board member at Hounslow Chamber of Commerce. Ursel has significant global technology sector experience with leading corporates, including Cisco, and has worked closely with government, industry, and in the startup sector. Tim and Ursel between them bring, whoops, let the police go by. Tim and Ursel between them bring really extensive experience to working at the interface between academia, industry and government, and to demonstrate how universities can effectively combine transdisciplinary programmatic activities and strategic corporate philanthropy. So very exciting, highly relevant topics to discuss today. And what we're able to get is a sneak peek at a fantastic and eagerly anticipated book that will be coming out later this year. That has the title University Industry Partnerships for Positive Change, Transformational Strategic Alliances Towards the UN SDGs. And in this book, they're going to explain how long-term alliances can be forged to have transformational impact on the greatest challenges facing our world today, such as climate change. And we're fortunate to have the opportunity to hear from them directly. And also later, I will invite you to put your questions in the chat and have the opportunity of hearing directly from these two authors about this vital area of work. So welcome everybody, and I will now begin by asking first Tim and then Ursula, what inspired you to write this book? Over to you, Tim.
Her experience in the commercialization of groundbreaking innovation is highly sought after. She holds several positions beyond the company, such as chairman of the board of directors of the Nanomedicine Innovation Network, and vice chair of the board of the Center for Innovation.
Okay, I can maybe enable you to unmute yourself now.
Great. Can everyone hear?
Working.
It's working. It's working. Thank you. Yes. So welcome everybody. It's a real honour to be here today. Yes, in terms of my inspiration for this book about partnerships towards the to achieve the UN SDGs, I've been a practitioner of university industry partnerships now for about 15 years. I've worked in both corporate engagement and corporate philanthropy, and I've learned a number of lessons over those years of what works and what doesn't work in terms of building partnerships with companies large and small, by the way, not just the big corporates. But I think that during the time of the pandemic, when I was starting to think about writing a book, I was inspired to see what can be achieved in record time through partnerships. In my own university, UCL, my university partnered with a famous Formula One team to develop a CPAP breathing device that really saved lives. It's like a type of ventilator, a portable ventilator, and it was put out there on a soft license, essentially, to allow anyone around the world to download the IP, essentially, and build the ventilator to save lives. I think that's a great example of what's possible at an accelerated pace and scale when we have that sense of urgency about the need for solutions. And of course, with the UN SDGs, we're meant to be achieving those by 2030, and that will require a huge amount of better coordination in terms of these relationships, these unique, not business to business relationships, but business to university relationships that I do think are a special type of relationship that will leverage the connections between the global north and the south more than ever before, and bring about reconciliation between communities and allow universities to really fulfill their potential and be the best, not just in the world in terms of rankings, but the best for the world.
Very inspiring words there about business to university relationships and best in the world and for the world. Ursula, can I ask you to perhaps share your inspiration for the development of this book?
Thanks, Sionade. Just to reinforce on the messaging around sense of urgency that Tim has just highlighted, we have also realized that such challenges could not be solved by one organization in today's world. People and organizations, institutions need to really come together, act upon the challenges together, and co-innovate in a deeper way than ever before to achieve societal benefits. We realized also to create a better future for all, UN SDGs actually need to be at the central point, at the focus of universities, and industry also needs to achieve a positive change for the benefit, for the greater benefit of humanity. So with all these things in mind, we just put our minds together and decided to write up this book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, you've painted a very inspiring picture and touched on a number of major themes. Looking forward to unpicking some of those in the course of our conversation. But let me turn again to you, Tim, and perhaps ask you to be able to, if you could sort of explain how your approach really increases opportunity, increases impact, which is what universities love to embrace, but also value for both businesses and the university. So opportunity, impact and value creation, how does your approach make that possible?
Yes, thank you, Sionade. Yes, so we know there are 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, and goal number 17 is all about partnerships. partnerships for the goals, and I think that is it's great that we have that goal there, but we need to actually implement it. So we know partnerships are crucial to underpin all those all those other goals, including huge challenges like climate change, that tackling gender inequality, access to higher education, access to education full stop. And so how, though, can we work together in a deeper way than ever before to achieve that? So I believe that right from the outset, with our partnerships with industry, we have to be more ambitious. University leaders need to be more ambitious than ever before in working with companies to scale up the solutions to some of these huge challenges facing the world. So they need to, if you like, bake in transformation into their partnerships. And many universities have transformation and positive change as part of their missions and their strategies, but that the SDGs provide a fantastic framework that aligns with many university missions and goals that companies also are interested in, and many of them have sections on their websites that talk about the SDGs. They want to create societal value, not just value for their shareholders, and increasingly we're seeing that desire from the companies we're talking to. They want to work with universities to align with universities' vision and values around societal benefit. So, as Ursula said, no one organisation can do it alone, and I think increasingly both universities and industry are aware of that.
Thank you, thank you. And Ursula, perhaps you can pick up this theme to talk about the some of the ESG in the context of the metrics, the ways in which, you know, again, businesses are able to capture value from these types of interactions with universities.
Exactly, and once again, to complement Tim's messaging there, university-industry relationships can be deemed as a very complex task to tackle, to manage and deliver. So I think simplicity should be really taken into the centricity of all these initiatives, all these endeavors. And first and foremost, I think all the stakeholders in a university-industry relationship context should be able to speak the same language. Open communication channels and willing to exchange knowledge through those channels to maximize societal benefits by finding practical solutions to some of the world's biggest challenges is utmost important. So in our book, we talk about this transformational change, stepping up the game to the next level, both on the university and industry side of the things, and ensuring and maintaining this bidirectional communication to tackle these challenges. We highlight on these aspects, and we find it really beneficial for all sides to make it as simple as possible. And taking UN SDGs into account in this context is utmost important as well, because that's the final goal.
And Sionade, if I could just touch on something else. In order for this to happen, we actually talk about the need to adopt a next generation or a fifth generation mindset, which is a type of new organizational model for universities that focuses on maximizing co-value creation and combines both mutual benefit. There always has to be a what's in it for me working with industry and for the university, but also societal benefit. And here in the UK, many of our universities are publicly funded, so that's even more important to demonstrate societal benefit. And what we've recognised is that there was a famous book about 20 years ago now called The Third Generation University, and we have noticed that the third generation university emphasized that the universities have both a research, a teaching and a knowledge exchange role for society. But we believe where we're at the moment is we're seeing universities progress from a third generation university, which was quite transactional in its approach to working with industry, towards a fourth generation university, which has a greater focus on strategic alliances, institutional alliances, for mutual benefit. But actually a fifth generation approach takes that a step further to think about the need for transformational strategic alliances that don't just in some cases involve one university and one company, but involve many universities and many companies, both in the global north and south, working together in a sort of consortia model for maximizing societal benefit.
Mm. That's that I think that's again, you're sort of painting a very visionary picture of how we can sort of envisage this collaboration. But Ursula, can I come back to you and ask you perhaps to kind of describe the critical steps on this journey? It might help our participants diagnose where they are today and what they need to be working towards. I mean, I think you hinted at moving from transaction to transformation, but Ursula, can you perhaps give us a sense of what those critical steps are on that journey?
Certainly, Sinead. This is all about, once again, walking through that journey from transactional to partnerships and then to strategic kind of relationship or partnership, making sure that it is long-lasting. So over many years, we'll be working together on a certain topic or topics in multitudes. And then what we try to describe in this book is making it transformational. So there's yet another light at the end of the tunnel. Can we make it somewhat different from the other strategic kind of relationships, that the output of this relationship will actually create real value and transform, let's say, that certain industry segment, as it will never look the same again. So can we make that kind of a thing happen and make that a positive change and create a better future for all? So that societal benefit element at the center of everything we do. To be able to do that, we need to put all those scattered transactional one-off type of relationships in both university and industry side of the things into perspective and try to consolidate these efforts and actually streamline these efforts towards the same common goal of making that transformational and strategic. So we came up with this contractual engagement process in order to be able to deliver this idea. In our model, we have this overlay functionality that goes across the faculties and departments in a university context that puts together these efforts, converges and integrates these efforts on the same platform for almost like centralized management, and takes log of each and every effort as well, so to say, in a CRM type of manner. In this process that we have reimagined, we start with the identification of the prospects. So we do not want to work with any, if we are the university, of course, we do not want to work with any company out there. We'd like to work with the ones that actually share the same value with us. We'd like to work with the ones that have the same kind of mission statement with us, because that's all about partnership. We're going to put our skin into the game and try to make it work and deliver together. So we have to really start with the identification of the prospects that we'd like to engage with at the starter, at the very inception of this process. And then once identified those we'd like to engage with, well, top-down approach really always works. So we need to understand, we need to once again identify who we're talking to, who we'd like to talk to. So that kind of a peer-to-peer communication as an outcome of this process, who we can actually interface with, that's really important to detect, determine. And once we've made that connection, hopefully we can jump into a discovery workshop with members, with participants from both university and industry settings, discussing the areas of collaboration, how we can actually work around these potential innovative research areas that will make a real change in the most positive way possible. And then hopefully, once determined those areas of collaboration, we can jump into an alignment workshop with the inclusion, addition of the exec sponsors from both ends. From the university, it would be the exec sponsor, such as a vice dean enterprise, for example, or the head of department, a decision maker that will sponsor and support this engagement process to move forward. From the industry side of the things, once again, we need a decision maker to ensure the continuity of the process. Once we've created this collaborative environment, then we need to be able to legalize the process. So we jump into NDAs, MOUs, in order to formalize this engagement. And these documents should be as simple as possible, rather than 6, 7, 10 pages of NDA, for example. Can we do that in one single page, a pager of NDA? That will actually work on a mutual benefit, and you know, that will help deliver things in the most seamless way possible. And then, of course, once formalized this in the most appropriate way possible, we need to come up with a corporate framework agreement that should be a living document, gets updated based on the feedback on a continuous basis. So it's not going to be there all the time. We need to be aware that it will be a document to be updated and changed over the time based on the new conditions, needs of this partnership by all the stakeholders. And of course, that will lead us to the value creation in the end. And value can be in many ways. It can be in the means of financials that could be recognized in terms of different revenue streams in different ledgers in that financial setting, and or it may actually be value in kind in terms of reputation, in terms of training, in terms of talent acquisition. That could be something that will make the transformational effect as we have aimed for right in the beginning.
Okay, so I'm hearing processes of diagnosis as you look into the existing relationships and make selections therein, processes of discovery to kind of mine for that value opportunity and that alignment opportunity, the alignment workshop itself, and the processes of alignment, and then that active kind of ongoing activity around agreed kind of areas of collaboration and coordination and co-innovation, I think is what I'm hearing you say. So some very sort of specific steps on this journey that organizations can take. So thank you so much. I mean, what I'd like to come back to you, Tim, and ask about is how business and university leaders can really create the cultures that support this activity, the sorts of strategic partnerships that you're describing. What are the kind of cultural conditions that will really help strategic partnerships thrive?
Yes, there's a whole chapter in our book about enabling such an environment, because there's the famous phrase that culture trumps strategy, eat strategy for breakfast. And you do need to develop a culture in the university, which is, first of all, it's a learning culture. And that might sound strange because universities are meant to be learning cultures, aren't they? But too often we find that universities don't learn very quickly in terms of their partnership activity about what works and what doesn't. So too often we see the universities that perhaps are too focused on seeing industry as just a source of cash, or even their alumni as a source of cash, and that must not be the case. They can open up far more opportunities through their connections, their expertise, their talent in those organizations, than just simply being a source of cash. And our approach recognizes that you need to build a programmatic range of activities with companies before you go and ask for philanthropy. You have to have a track record. You have to build the trust with those companies before you can expect them to want to give to a new building, for example. So it is about creating a culture where you recognize the value of having industry involved in research, in teaching, in knowledge exchange, in all of your core activities. And we talk in the book about a VSEM, vision, strategy, execution, and metrics. So having an institutional VSEM where if you think about all your core activities, and then you say, well, how can my partnerships with industry and with other sectors, charities too, augment and underpin and improve and accelerate all of these activities, so that we are very focused on our institutional mission, our academic mission, but ultimately we're focused on achieving societal benefits as well as delivering on our institutional mission. Of course, most institutional mission statements do talk about societal benefit, but that's what we want to be focused on more than ever in a fifth generation university.
That's great. And I'm here. I mean, my own experience in working in this sector is the encouragement of looking across as well as just within disciplines in addressing these big challenges. Okay, I don't know, Ursula, if you wanted to add anything about the creating the right culture to support the work.
Yeah, just on that culture bit, I think we really need a culture change once again on both sides of the equation, not only for the universities but also within the operational model of the industry in general. In academia, for example, there's an established culture of state aid, so the funding coming from state, QR ratings and research projects targeted for delivering against those kind of state aid missions. So programmatic activities within industry may or may not be secondary. So that culture change needs to come and shift people's minds, especially the academics, I think. And in the industry, they live in their comfort zone. They, well, especially after during and after the pandemic, they now concentrate on their core business activities. So they are kind of in a survival mode, so to say. So academic relationships may be deemed as if they were of luxury, or yet another business activity is nice to have. So in our book, actually, we suggest this kind of an environment needs to change, and a new paradigm shift, a new mindset actually need to come, perhaps under the supervision and steering guidance of the governments as well. And that's where United SDGs really come to the center point of this kind of a thinking, because whatever we do, regardless from the business side of the things or the academia, it should be for the benefit of the people in the community. So it should bring about a cross-communal benefit to all. To be able to do that and put all these things into context, we need to be able to come up with an interlock between communities, governments, industry in general, and academia. So it's I think utmost important, and we describe how we can do that in the book, to determine that that interlock. That interlock will be very closely connected to a foresight capability that needs to be developed in-house in all these organizations, in both universities and industry, in the corporates. They need to be able to come up with a new mindset to do horizon scanning. They need to be able to understand what that disruptive thing around the corner might be, because if they don't disrupt, their business will get disrupted in the end. So this understanding, this hyper awareness should really be at the back of their minds. And universities, I think there's no better medium than universities, that they need to have this organizational learning culture and also teach it to the industry as well. So continuous learning and comprehending these disruptive initiatives that might be just around the corner is extremely important in terms of creating a new culture.
There's some interesting questions coming up, but I'm going to keep those for the end. But I heard you, Ursula, make reference to the sort of hyper awareness, hyper vigilance with regard to the horizon and pending disruption. And of course, Tim, when you were making your opening remarks, you talked about the value of urgency. So I wonder if perhaps I can ask you about how institutions can recognize and harness that value of urgency, and what advice you have to make sure that we maintain hypervigilance. So Tim, first to you.
Yes, yes, thank you, Sionade. Yes, so I think that, we are seeing, aren't we, in Pakistan at the moment, for example, these monsoons and the people displaced and the impact of climate change. We see it too, in the California wildfires. We see it in 40-degree temperatures in the UK. I'm just focusing, by the way, on one SDG there, climate change, but we can see right now the impact of climate change on our countries, whether we're in the global north or south. And I think more than ever, we need to leverage the complementary assets that we have in the global north to work with the global south to help people find localized solutions, but we might be able to, for example, leverage the links we have with the VC communities in the global north, the experience we have at running entrepreneurial accelerators in the global north in our universities, working with countries in the global south to help them to create entrepreneurial communities that will innovate and tackle the challenges facing those regions. So it is about having an equitable approach. It is about recognizing the urgency and how the impact actually of climate change is going to be perhaps even felt even more greatly in some of the poorest communities of the world, and recognizing that we have a moral responsibility in the wealthier, the global north, to actually work to bring about positive change. And of course, another SDG that is very relevant is access to education. Again, universities of all places should have a huge responsibility for that particular SDG, to open up access. It might be by partnering with universities in the global south. I don't think these days it's about us creating a new campus in those countries. I think it's much more about a more equitable partnership of perhaps joint course development, empowering staff, widening the talent ocean rather than accelerating the brain drain. So all of these things are important for us, because, you know, the SDGs are meant to be realized by 2030. Too often universities are focused on realizing the value of their IP, maximizing the value of their IP, rather than actually releasing the value. I think we need to be releasing value far more than just realizing value. You know, we want to release value of our IP for the good of society. Like I mentioned earlier, the example from COVID of the CPAP breathing device, getting out there and saving lives. Universities must not become so focused on IP that it's never actually going to do any good for society, because we're too focused on the value of that IP. Cash value, sorry.
Yes, yes, cash value. Powerful words. Ursula, hypervigilance, hyper-awareness, post-pandemic learning, and the agility that we must demonstrate to manifest this hyper-awareness. Any comments?
Yes, just to continue on the same storyline Tim was mentioning, we need to be able to make use of technology in the best way possible, without, of course, eliminating the human factor as well. But of course, digitizing the processes towards a better execution of our goals, and then maximizing productivity levels and measuring upon success are all utmost important. And how are we going to do that? Let's say, for instance, we have determined the interlock, we have determined the sense of urgency, and we have come up with a strategy to deliver this. As Tim mentioned earlier, VSAM, putting out a VSAM chart would actually be really helpful, because it would then illustrate on what strands of strategy, execution, and metrics we'd be able to deliver all this. I think at this very point, ESGs come into the picture from an organizational perspective in terms of the metrics, especially. Environmental social governance, ESGs, are a framework to be integrated onto these organizations' strategy. They provide a financial or economic driver for positive change, as investors, for example, pension funds, are increasingly wanting to invest in companies that are doing good for wider society. ESGs also provide useful metrics for measuring the success of organizational performance around UN SDGs. Any organization, in our view, as also described in the book, should adopt a VSAM methodology in their execution of their strategy in a structured way. So ESGs are really extremely important to complement the storyline here.
Thank you so much. So I want to go back to a phrase again that you used a bit earlier, Tim, about the difference between B2B and B2U. And
Yes.
we've heard about the stages of developing these strategic partnerships, but in the B2U, business to university context, what does this really mean for organizational roles and processes?
Yes, so universities, of course, have different cultures like like companies, there is often there can often be quite a division between academics and professional services staff. Just as in a local government, there can be a division between the politicians and the administrators. So it is very important, as Ursula touched on earlier, to have an academic champion involved in any of these relationships that will help drive it. But that's not to downplay the vital importance of professional services staff who have ideally an industry background. They speak the same language as industry, and they understand what companies are looking for, that companies aren't charities, for example, that there does have to be a commercial there does have to be a commercial element to an incentive for what they're doing, as well as to achieve societal benefits. So delivering value to shareholders as well as to delivering value to wider society as well. So I think also organizations like universities can be seen as quite complicated institutions to deal with by industry, and that can, rather than their typical counterparts in other businesses in a B2B relationship, they might need to speak to academics, to professional services staff, to central teams, to departmental teams. But it's a similar thing for universities engaging with industry. Often the different parts of companies aren't very good at talking to each other. This is what I've realized from colleagues in industry. They have HR teams, they have technical teams, marketing teams, and sometimes they're not communicating very well about their engagements with a particular university. So I think universities need to seek to hide the wiring. That's how I like to describe it. They have to try to have a single point of contact and understand through a CRM system, as Ursula mentioned, for example, what interactions are already happening with those companies, and understand from the industry side, what is the capacity of this organization to have a deep transformational alliance with my university?
Thank you. And maybe calling on you, Ursula, to reflect on your experience, your industry experience looking at university. I have many businesses tell me that my university is hard to deal with. So this is really resonating with me. But Ursula, what would you like to add?
Just to your point, Sionade, if you don't know about that certain thing enough, then you get scared of it. It looks just too complicated to you, and then it just looks like it is just too hard to deal with. So it's once again back to my earlier comment about hyper awareness, understanding where we are, who we are dealing with, who we are interfacing or we're talking to, and what we're trying to achieve together. And that's possible in an accelerated manner by the use of technology. So technology, having found the interlock between the university and industry, can be used at its best to deliver more functional results that will make better sense and also ensure this relationship is a long-lasting one, a strategic one. And hopefully that can also help transform the industry, like, for example, the invention of a new vaccine to change the healthcare industry. Or just like what Uber did to transportation industry, it's never the same again. Or just like what Airbnb did to hospitality industry, can we come up with a similar kind of case study that will make that real transformation to happen for the better of the society? Back to the business to business and business to university conversation, I think there's also a university to business angle to that as well. It would be a more effective type of approach to all these three, B2B, B2U, and U2B, by leveraging technology at the most effective manner. Automating the processes is really important for more productive results. Orchestration of all the activities in the broader context of the university, including all the departments and faculties and the business units within all those, from a bird's eye view on a single dashboard view, for example, is extremely important. Hence, streamlining these efforts for the same common goals.
Hmm. I'm hearing this this again, this kind of shared value vision coming across quite clearly. But Ursula, if I can ask you a little bit more about that. In your experience, where do partnerships sometimes get a bit stuck? And how do you need, what's really needed to break through? Can you talk about that?
It comes in many folds, really. There might be a long series of reasons why partnerships may fail. So once again, it's about the hyper awareness of where we are, understanding the status quo, and how we can come up with alternative ways of tackling it. It's about, once again, the communications and addressing the what's in it for me question of all the stakeholders. It might be the industry looking for a solution for a certain area of innovation from a commercial perspective, and academia should be able to come up with that very answer to that question so that the partnership can happen, and vice versa. If academia is looking for an innovative research project to be funded, maybe a co-funded chair opportunity with one of the leading corporates of the world, the industry should be able to effectively address that question. So it's about communications, understanding each other. If there is a lack of all this, lack of both internal and external communications on both organizational levels, then unfortunately partnerships may have a challenge to continue. Also, there are certain things like a lack of upfront discussion about shared IP, intellectual property. Okay, we're going to do this innovative research project, but who's going to own what, to what extent? They should all be addressed in advance of the project's start. Also, there should be a question about the costs, so the budget, readiness levels, resources, who's going to do what. This requires a very thorough preparation and the sophisticated planning upfront, time commitments and all that. So we need, but all in all, I think to make this relationship work, hence a long-term strategic partnership to happen, we need to have greater flexibility around all these question areas, all these topics around IP, for example, and we need a greater coordination in our approach from a mutual benefit as well. A more joined up kind of approach should be adopted.
Thank you. Just so that colleagues on this call know, I've got two more questions for the group, for the authors, and then we'll go to some of the questions that are starting to come through on the chat. So people who have questions, please do feel free to put them in the chat. But I've got two more questions I'd like to put to Ursula and Tim. Tim, can I turn to you and ask you to reflect on where the kind of initiative tends to come from in developing these partnerships? Does it seem to come mostly from universities looking out or businesses looking in? I mean, can you perhaps comment on your experience of how these partnerships are initiated?
Yes, certainly. So in my experience, it's a bit of a mixture, but it does depend on your brand, how strong your brand is in the market. I'm very fortunate to be, in a university with a very strong brand. So we have a lot of companies approaching us, large and small, but other universities, depending on their regional context, they might have many smaller companies that they're working with, and that's fine, that's good. And perhaps there needs to be a more reactive, a more proactive approach, in those cases. But for us, if you want to achieve transformational strategic alliances, the onus is on us to be far more proactive in terms of partner selection. So yeah, I think finding the right partners becomes critical in wanting to find companies that really do align with your values. If you want to move beyond the transactional to the transformational in terms of your outputs for societal benefit. So one example of that is we set up a partnership with an agricultural research facility because I was working in an engineering department, and I realized that there are many questions in agriculture that could benefit from an understanding of the Internet of Things, for example. IoT and communication technologies. So it's also having the foresight that Ursula mentioned earlier is also important with these partnerships.
Fantastic. Ursula, did you want to jump in on that, on the sense of where the initiative comes from?
I think it's a bit both. It may come from the university, it may come from the industry, or both at the same time, depending on whatever that sense of urgency might be. It might be moving away from the fossil fuel, renewable energy, more investments should be made on clean energy, whatever it might be in terms of maintaining a sustainable future and that societal benefit, and creating that future that would be of a positive impact for all. I think there's a homework once again for both sides to undertake, and maybe the homework starts from the educational level. Higher education industry, I think, should adopt a new way of teaching in terms of what industry expects and how the graduates will play a pivotal role in the industry after graduation, in their post-graduation, and once they've started their new employment. They need to, I think this should be in the curriculum, really, in terms of when the graduates go to the corporate type of world, to the industry, they have to have a mindset of collaboration with universities to make that positive change happen, because the future will be shaped up by the graduates of today. So if we can put this into their minds, or to the back of their minds, and over the time, all these generations will hopefully come up with the same type of comprehension of the things, and a new type of a collaborative environment will be flourished between universities and industries. They will work in the government, they will work for the industry, they will be, well, they're already part of the communities anyway. But this seed thinking should be actually put into their minds, as it should be part of the curriculum at the outset. They will help businesses, because these are the graduates, these are the new employees of the future, that will help businesses understand how to work with universities. They will have at least a thought about how to simplify things and keep it to the simplest form as well, in terms of relationships, and move things beyond CSR. From the industry perspective, corporate social responsibility is probably one of the tools, one of the channels that could be leveraged when it comes to university relationships. But actually, we're talking about something beyond that. It's not only the corporate social responsibility, it's about creating a new future that will really be based on all the positive pillars. And hopefully that will also help reconcile not only the commercial components in the jigsaw puzzle, but also the governments that are in conflict with each other, to come up with a more collaborative kind of a manner. Hence, science diplomacy that can also play a pivotal role in achieving all these.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want. Sorry, did I cut you off there? I was just saying I'm quite inspired by this kind of interlock around talent, around innovation, around sustainability in the way that you've described. But I just want to put my last question before we start to tackle some of the questions in the chat. And I think this might speak to where you were going, Ursula, around the diplomacy of science. Perhaps we can come back to that. But this is the big question, and I'm going to go to Tim first, then come back to you, Ursula, to have the last word on this. How do we bring the benefits and the opportunities of the transformational alliances and partnerships that you've been describing to the global stage? We've been talking about UCL, a little bit about City, but you've been talking about the global north and south, the challenge to the world that we're facing. How do we bring these opportunities onto that stage, Tim?
Yes, so I've touched on the importance of global North-South relationships. More than ever, I think we're going to see a huge growth in the partnerships between universities in the global North and South, particularly around the SDG related to access to higher education, but also tackling climate change as well. Those two stand out, and gender equality as well, particularly. But I think that there will be more consortia models. Impact investment is also becoming really important. A new generation of philanthropists and investors that I do think a lot about where they can get greatest impact in terms of societal benefits from their investments. And that means that universities need to partner more with other universities that can develop localized solutions for the challenges that they're facing, and grow this culture of entrepreneurship and innovation in other parts of the world. So, for example, my own university, we recently set up a global disability innovation hub, working with entrepreneurs in Kenya around the entrepreneurship around disability innovation, setting up an accelerator in Kenya, and providing support and training, working with the universities there and entrepreneurs there. I think we're going to see a lot more of that happening between the global North and South, and because the benefits are huge from these sorts of partnerships, and it's a much more equitable. They're going to be much more equitable relationships that harness the complementary assets and resources of those countries, as well as the global North.
Powerful and vital work. Ursula, do you want to finish the point I cut off about the opportunities to use this thinking for diplomacy, for really increasing the global impact?
Just to touch on that very briefly, I think science diplomacy is a very important concept that needs to be taken into account a lot more seriously. Science can really help reconcile different partitions of a conflict zone, to reconcile and hopefully resolve things for good. Once again, it goes back to addressing the what's in it for me question of all these stakeholders. What's in it for them? It's about communications. It's about sitting around the table and understanding each other and trying to address the needs of these stakeholders. And then once determined that, finding that interlock and steering that to the same common goal for mutual benefit. And that mutual benefit and societal benefit is really sitting at the core of everything we do in terms of partnerships. I think it's also about understanding, just to conclude this storyline, what partnership actually means and how important it is for everyone, not only the organizations, but also from a cross-communal type of perspective. I read elsewhere the other day, if you can turn if you can turn your customers into partners, then that is the real definition of success. I thought up until very recently, customers were the most important thing. Customer is the goal, and you should always aim everything you do towards the customers. But actually, customer becomes even more valuable and creates more value when you can manage to turn them into a partner of yours, because then you start looking at the same direction together. So partnership, understanding what partnership actually stands for, is extremely important in the context of universities and industries as well. And SDGs really provide a great framework for having these conversations to take place between universities and industry, as we all want to create a better future for our children and children's children.
Wonderful words indeed. Thank you for that. Okay, so I would encourage our participants to consider posting any questions in the chat. I'd absolutely love to see you if you'd like to turn your cameras on. That would also be very welcome. But otherwise, I'm going to just go to the chat and begin with a question that was put to me, put to you too. Okay, so for both Ursula and Tim. The question as posed is, culture change does not happen without an incentive system that really pushes and drives new opportunities that are inviting. So what sort of incentives and what opportunities do you have experience of, or would you suggest? So how do we really get moving using perhaps some incentives or as a mode of engagement for culture change?
Yes, one thing that comes to mind here is a growth in the UK context. So my experience has always only been in the UK, in a new type of professor called a professor of practice. And these professors help to often come from an industry background, and they help to integrate industry insights and entrepreneurship into the teaching. And I think that too often in research intensive universities, there's a bit of a pecking order that, you know, the professors that are focused on research, they're the top ones. But actually, no, it should be much more equitable between the professors of teaching. And we do this at UCL, professors of teaching, professors of research. And I think there needs to be this third categorization, professors of practice. So this is about getting more people from an industry background involved in the teaching. They could be called honorary professors, but it's about getting those insights, because that's what students want. They want much more real world industry insight into their teaching experience.
So it sounds like making the traditional university more porous to practitioners and that sort of expertise, and being much more welcoming to that, perhaps those experiences within the academy.
Yes.
Thank you.
And sorry, one last thing, sorry, Sionade, is also about career progression. So for staff like myself, there isn't really a clear progression route for some professional services staff, particularly in this area of partnerships. So that does need to be improved, because academics have a very clear progression route for their careers. But skillful people with project management, communication skills, marketing skills, who are doing these sorts of roles in universities, often they're under-recognized and undervalued. And so that does need to improve. So whoever asked that question is absolutely right.
Yeah, well, I would concur, having come from industry into an academic environment myself. So yeah, we're in sympathy with that point of view, absolutely. But Ursula, what would you like to say about how we incentivize to accelerate culture change?
I think this is a very important topic, really, because it's about that appetite generation on both ends of the equation, again, industry and academia. Industry needs academia-aware people in their organizations to make this new model to work and take off. And the academia needs industry-aware people, hence the practitioners in their professional services teams. So how are we going to really attract these people to come down and work with us? If they are in industry, why should they come down and work for the university? And vice versa, if they are already in a university environment and they were either an academic or professional services practitioner for many years, why would they just leave their comfort zone and work for the industry and deal with all that competitive edge and you know, in that battlefield of talent pool? So there are different kind of objectives in a corporate world and all that. I think these two paths should not be deemed as if they were two discrete kind of ways. There should be an intersection, because otherwise we can't really come up with those interlocks. That's why we need a fifth generation university, a paradigm shift in our way of thinking. And that's why we need an enhanced readiness level in the industry to make this happen as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now let me go to another question that I've got for Ursula. This one's been put to you. How far do ESGs connect to the SDGs? Are all the SDGs covered by ESG, or are there some gaps in focus?
It's a great question. As it stands for the moment, in my humble opinion, ESGs, well, like it actually stands for environmental, social, and governance. And with governance, primarily it's meant corporate governance. It's more around kind of climate change concern and all that. But actually, UN SDGs is a very broad spectrum of goals. We have 17 goals there in many different areas. We are trying to address with UN SDGs the equality in education, justice for everyone. So it's not only the climate thing, really. I think ESGs should be a bit more functional in terms of their span across the whole spectrum of UN SDGs, and treat them as a whole, because we can only make this happen once we've got all the UN SDGs working in harmony and as a single entity, really delivered against the goals for achieving that positive impact and the better future for all. Hence, as an enabler of all that, and the provider of metrics for success and measurement, ESGs should be a bit more inclusive and in wider coverage, I believe.
Thank you. Although the question wasn't directed to you, Tim, I don't know if you've got anything that you might want to kind of add to that about any gaps or in the kind of overlap between an ESG and the ESGs and the SDG.
I think that universities still have a long way to go in things like, gender equality, in terms of, ensuring that there is a much better balance in terms of, the most senior level positions in universities. I think in terms of the university presidents worldwide, the vast majority are men, and we need a much more equitable higher education sector. Obviously, the same thing applies to industry as well. There are common challenges, but what I think in a transformational approach, we can actually work together, like I said earlier, to expand the talent ocean rather than accelerate the brain drain. So in certain areas like my own computer science, in the UK, we want to see a lot more people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds studying computer science. So we would want to partner with companies and other universities that want to make a difference in that area, and I think have a long-term approach to solving those challenges.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know I'm just going to give another couple of minutes for perhaps more questions to come from the floor. I've got I'll come to I've got one that I want to put to you just because it was provoked. So you've both mentioned paradigm shift, and paradigm shift, in my understanding, only happens at a point of crisis. So what's your view on that? Are we really at a point of crisis to prompt that paradigm shift? Tim, I'll go to you first.
Yes, I think so. I believe it's a tipping point really for universities, because this is driven by a number of different trends, such as digital transformation that was starting to happen, but was greatly accelerated by the pandemic. And we did see, actually, amazingly, how such old institutions as universities were able to pivot very quickly to an online model. So that's only continuing to accelerate. People have seen, most universities now are not sending so many staff to conferences around the world because, first of all, it's not so good for the environment with the air travel, but secondly, you can save a lot of money, and digital collaboration technologies are making those collaborations easier as well. And still face-to-face is important, but it's amazing what can be done online. I think universities have realized that. I think also other things such as the trend of Industry 4.0, or the convergence of all sorts of technologies coming together, including artificial intelligence, which is impacting whole sectors, and the need for greater, what I call team science approaches. So much more engagement between STEM and non-STEM disciplines. And we didn't touch on that today, but that is vital for fifth generation universities understand that. And they look at how they can make that, systemize that, operationalize that, in terms of funding proposals, because that is vital as well for the future.
Thank you. Okay, Ursula, crisis.
Crisis, as you mentioned, tipping point, and change actually really happens when the crisis is there, because we need to come up with a solution to overcome it. I think we have more than that on our plate these days, especially the geopolitical situation. We talk about the discrepancies, we talked about the challenges between global north and south, not only for higher education industry in terms of academic collaboration, in terms of joint research projects that could be done, but also there are some industrial collaborational challenges raised by these geostrategic issues that are kind of an obstacle really for things to be reconciled yet again. So I think once again science diplomacy could actually play a better role to resolve all these and make it a working model, because otherwise we're really approaching to that tipping point. We need global north to level up with global south and vice versa. We don't want any borders, let's say, when it comes to commercialization of the innovative research project. We need that to be leveraged for all the world rather than a certain hub, region, or certain territory. We need it to be for the societal benefit of all the nations around the world. And I think United Nations in that context has a better and bigger role to play as well, which may be deemed as a boring kind of approach as well, that United Nations need to chip in and sort these things out. But I think there's a greater role, really, in my humble opinion, that UN, along with its SDGs, can play to make this happen. And hopefully the positive change will come out of the tipping point.
Okay, thank you. That's a perfect segue to perhaps go to our convener today, if I could. Can I go to you, please, and ask you to jump in at this point?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. What a fantastic conversation. I'm wondering what you think about, as you talk about the next generation of universities and the partnerships and the transformation. We have a live example, if you will, of I believe some of the hopes and wishes you have for this partnership. Stanford University, as you may very well know, started off on a very, very different path than other elite universities. It expected its faculty to be in industry. It had a very unusual faculty-industry relationship that almost no other elite university has been able to emulate. It has conflict of interest rules that basically make no sense by all other university standards, where there is more conflict than you can imagine in any given situation. And having even studied a number of innovation ecosystems, it is impossible to replicate the Silicon Valley relationship of Stanford to the Valley, even 40 miles north at Berkeley, another major hub of innovation. So I wonder if that particular industry relationship, where faculty are free to participate in industry, they don't have the 1 in 7 rule that most universities have, most elite universities have, where students and faculty and everyone is very much in mesh with each other, whether that is a live example that we can use to help other universities see how to break these walls down, that it doesn't have to be so walled off.
Great question. Thank you so much. Tim, shall I go to you first?
I think that's a really interesting point. And yes, certainly I don't believe that any university should seek to just replicate the Silicon Valley model. I think that it has to be tailored to their individual context, geographical context, regional economy, etc. But there are certain things that we can learn from Stanford. For example, allowing the students to own their own intellectual property, I think, and also not overvaluing your IP at the detriment of getting that IP out there. And like I touched on earlier about releasing value, not just realizing value. But often I believe at Stanford, the university would only take a very small proportion of the equity in the spin-outs from the staff. But I think in the UK generally, we're not so good at that. The University Tech Transfer Office wants to retain so much that investors think, well, I don't really think it's worth it because the university has everything. And it's just not realistic. And then there's no incentive for the academics. So that has to be much more balanced. But allowing students to own their IP means that they can go ahead and set up startups without the university getting in the way. And that can be very beneficial, I think.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ursula, did you have a response?
Yeah, I think what Stanford University does, and perhaps MIT could also be taken into the context as well, is really a best practice. Prior to this conversation, and also in our previous role at UCL, we have inserted our probe into the best practices around the world. And we have really come across with this very example of Stanford University and its unique relationship with Silicon Valley, how that, on what type of a basis actually that relationship is forged, and the multitude of benefits to all the stakeholders. It's really interesting. And as Tim said, there are lots of learnings that we can take away from that. Could that be replicated around the world? I think it depends on the nature of the territory, the business environment, academic readiness, whether or not we have that excellence in academic stuff for the certain institution. Once again, to the very point of conversation around global north and south. But I think it can be done, and it must be done. That's why actually we came up with this book. That's why we want to see universities make that step change, cultural change, whatever you name it, and adopt this fifth generation university mindset. That's why we think the industry should also, so to say, mutate and then come to a different type of level to ensure that channels to be forged, communications that take place, and then knowledge exchange that really happen in its genuine forms, and then that societal benefit with the help of UN SDGs adopted into the mix happen. So back to your question, Ramin, I think we need to really understand what's happening in these best practices, such as the one at Stanford, and learn from it and take this forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the challenges that is going on is this challenge of we have an unprecedented number of new universities being established around the world, especially in the global south and elsewhere. And it's interesting to see that so many of them are taking the traditional structural outlook. And I wonder if one of the efforts that the two of you can best intervene in is to get in on the ground floor at many of these institutions to start them in a different way, start the academic structure to include the professors of practice, as Tim was noting, start the industry relationship to be more of a partnership and not transactional. It's an opportunity. There is a number of universities under 50 years old, but when I study them, I find so many of them looking exactly like the 500-year-old institutions. And how do we kind of get into that? I think that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, if I may just add in with a couple of sentences, I think we are in a different era now where technology is really at the center point of everything. We can't just continue with the very conventional ways of how we had been doing this for many years, for a few centuries, perhaps. Yes, subject matter experience is extremely important, and maturity levels and all that. But we need to be able to understand how we can make use of technology in terms of retaining our competitive edge. It's a different type of world we are now trying to play this game with. And if we continue with our most conservative ways of doing it, as we had been doing for the last 300 years, we may not be able to compete anymore. We may fall behind and give the pivotal role to some others who actually do it properly. So all in all, I would like to say this is about entrepreneurship. This is about seeing that disruptive change around the corner. This is about adopting a startup kind of character into both the corporate world and academia. So talking the same language as we mentioned at the very beginning. I think going back to this very point, if we both have the entrepreneurial character on both ends in academia and industry, then probably we're going to have a more seamless type of conversation. And that's probably what Stanford is doing down there with the very vibrant startup ecosystem in Silicon Valley as well. In that innovation ecosystem there, you have the VCs, CVCs, all the foundations, university foundations. You have philanthropic goals instigated by the programmatic activities taken into account very efficiently. So that startup culture, that entrepreneurship is now at the DNA of Stanford, as far as I know and I understand. And probably this is one of those learnings we can take away from that.
Okay. Thank you so much, colleagues. I can't see any more questions coming up from the remaining participants. So I'm going to take the opportunity now to thank our fantastic authors, Tim and Ursula, for leading such an interesting discussion today, and alert our remaining participants that their book, which I personally am eagerly anticipating, which I've said that a couple of times, and I really mean it, their book, University Industry Partnerships for Positive Change, Transformational Strategic Alliances Toward UN SDGs, is coming out in the next couple of months, weeks. So stand by to be able to kind of plunge further into this fantastically important topic. I'd like to thank everybody for their attention and their engagement this afternoon, and I wish the conference well, and it's been a pleasure to be part of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sionade. Thank you, Ramin.
Thank you, Sionade, for chairing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.